Let's just begin. Let me just get your general take on where you think things are. We had that press statement from Benjamin Netanyahu last night, very much doubling down on his position, saying that Israel should prepare for a second war of independence. We're expecting a pretty ferocious ground invasion to begin imminently. There's been an intensification of aerial strikes. Just give us your assessment of where you think things are.
Well, I think you've laid out extremely well how the positioning and the use of the words, and words play such a big role, not only in what is being said and thought right now, but in the diplomacy that will be going on behind the scenes. And there's no question that the Prime Minister of Israel's perspective on this is that he has a country that is in terrible shock from these awful, awful crimes that have been committed. And in a sense that the country feels that the guarantee that citizens had of safety and security has been badly rocked, damaged, whatever word you want to use. And they have to somehow get back to a position of feeling safe. So there's a lot of the way that this is being described and talked about, I think, is in part at least to try and get those messages across. And then, of course, we see what's happening inside Gaza and the terrible tragedy, the consequences of what has happened. That is extraordinarily difficult to imagine the situation for the people there. And we've heard from lots of people who've got family, friends, who give us the information about what's happening in a place where there is a limit to how far people can move to try and escape. So this is an unfolding situation. And it strikes me very much that the diplomatic efforts that will be going on, but the use of language, which has become extraordinarily difficult and challenging. And I have to say this, the need to keep at least some thought for the longer term. You know, there is a longer term to this that we need to be mindful of, which I feel very strongly, as I do, by the way, in terms of the Ukraine war, that eventually there are things that have to be done, have to be thought about. And I just hope that people are also thinking about that too.
And in terms of that longer term positioning, I mean, you have done a lot of work in the region. You're one of very few Western diplomats who have spent a considerable amount of time talking with the Iranian authorities. What kind of future can you envisage, Cathy, when this conflict is over? And it could well go on for a very long time, I appreciate. But what is any chance of a sort of settled agreement in the region? What does that look like, particularly with players like Iran?
It's really complicated. In the 5 years, I spent huge amounts of time with the Iranian negotiators for the Iran nuclear deal that we were successful in achieving at that time. I spent even more time in Israel, going across from Israel to Jordan, to the Palestinian Authority, into Gaza, because we were working very hard, the European Union, together with the US, to see whether there was a way through to, well, I hate to go back to this phrase that people kind of get concerned about, the two-state solution, the ultimate objective being to protect the security of Israel, to allow people to live in peace, and to provide for the Palestinian people a safe and secure home alongside. And that objective has kind of got lost. It's been abandoned, some would say. It's been certainly pushed aside. And when we think about the longer term future and we think about countries like Iran, then there needs to be thought given to how we're going to try and help the region come to terms with a settled future
and Cathy,
and protect people within it.
I mean, but do you think that Iran would actually want a settled future, and would they want a two-state solution?
It's a very good question. Certainly in the context of how Iran is behaving now and its work with Hezbollah and with others in the region, there's not much indication that that would be the case. But we have to think about the future, and we have to think about the prospect and possibility that there may be ways in which Iran could be brought back to a negotiating table, and that there could be more work to be done.
And what do you think those things could be? How do you think?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, there has been, as we know, under this particular government, some conversations going on, the US and with the original partners in the Iran nuclear deal. There hasn't been a lot of progress. There may not be a lot of progress, but I do believe that you have to keep moving, you have to keep going. You know, when we did the Iran nuclear deal, I spent 4.5 years on that deal. I didn't begin it. It began years before. The work takes a long time, but it's worth doing. So in the context of the region, it's going to be really important to keep looking for solutions because, frankly, what's the alternative? The alternative is going to be that people don't feel they can live securely and safely. We're going to see the kind of events that we saw and the tragedies that we've seen. And we need to find a way to avoid that if we possibly can, to resolve what we can.
And Cathy, look, you're a real expert in the area. You've spent time and a lot of time in that area. A question that many of my listeners have posed, and maybe you have got some thoughts on this, is why do so few of the neighbours in the area, including Egypt, why are they refusing to take Palestinians as refugees? You know, Egypt has said that, you know, they very much are calling for a ceasefire, but they don't want to take any Palestinians in. What is going on there? Why is that, do you think?
I think you've got a combination of factors. In the specific case of Egypt, there will be concern from the Egyptians that they import the problem, if you see what I mean. That
in terms of Hamas people.
Yeah, that they bring in Hamas, and that they would worry would link back to the issues that they faced with the Muslim Brotherhood and, of course, the original arrival of President al-Sisi in that role. They also, I think, would be concerned that as Egypt has economic problems, it has huge issues of poverty. A lot of people in Egypt live below the poverty line. Would they get the support that would be necessary to provide for these people? And where would they put them? You know, there's talk about tents in the Sinai, which is hardly a long-term solution. So there are lots of issues about, well, what does this mean? What does this do for the domestic population? What does it mean in terms of the expectations that are then put on that country? And they worry that they get the problem and then we all just, you know, wander off and do something else and stop worrying about them and not actually helping to find longer term solutions. So lots of different reasons that people think, no, that's not the way we have to do this. We have to have a proper international sense of having really thought about how it's going to be resolved, rather than just simply moving the problem somewhere else.
Right. No, that makes everything you've said there makes a lot of sense. Now, Cathy, one of our listeners, Scott, has messaged in with a couple of questions. I'm going to put them to you if that is okay. He says, hello, Aisha. Enjoying the conversation. I've got 2 questions, if I may. Has Hamas given any indication that it wants a ceasefire? That's a good question. Cathy, what do you think about that?
Well, Scott, I don't know the answer to that, but there are lots of concerns about this word ceasefire, which is sort of, you know, used, and we understand what people are trying to talk about, which is an opportunity for innocent people to be supported, fed, watered, given medical aid, and moved within Gaza, if possible, to somewhere safer. All of that we understand. But I don't know whether Hamas have done that. And of course, he will know and you will know that there's a lot of concern out there that the willingness of Hamas to have a ceasefire may be linked to their ability then to use that time for their own benefit, to good effect, to move machinery, to move guns, to do whatever they would want to do.
Right.
That's one of the challenges with all of this particular use of words, and why people, I think, are finding it quite difficult to find the right language.
And then Scott's second question is there any truth in the claim that Hamas is deliberately keeping fuel away from the people of Gaza in order to strengthen the condemnation of Israel? And I suppose this question does get into something that I did want to ask you, which was, having spent time in the area, do you think the Palestinian people really do support Hamas?
So Hamas were elected, I think, in 2006, and there hasn't been an election since. 47% of people in Gaza are under 18. So if you do the maths, what you discover is that huge numbers of people in Gaza, have never had the chance to choose any kind of government of any kind, but certainly didn't vote for Hamas. So when people say, well, these people are governed by Hamas by choice, I think that's pushing it, to put it mildly. Hamas took the opportunity, and as so many times I've seen across the world, once given the chance to be elected, the best thing is never to have an election again, because you can just stay there. So I don't think, in the sense that we would understand it, you could argue at all that Hamas has the support in being elected and being chosen. I have no idea within Gaza if there are people who support Hamas, and I don't know what's currently happening inside. What I do know is that when I was in Gaza, one of the things I was doing was bringing equipment for summer schools for children, sacks for a sack race, paddling pools, the kind of things that kids everywhere like to have. And Hamas were very unhappy, and actually didn't want the equipment at all being brought in, because they didn't want it to be seen that there was outside support coming in of this kind. And that sort of sent me a message some years ago that, political objectives, how they saw themselves, what they believed as a terrorist organization, which they are, were quite different to what was needed for the people of Gaza.